So far in our Bible study, the first two Psalms we did, Psalms 1 and Psalms 19, were both a wisdom psalm. Remember back to the different types of psalms? So we started with two wisdom psalms. Now with Psalms 42 and 43, we get to our first lament psalms. So remember, 1/3 of the psalms are lament psalms, and lament means passionate expression of grief or sorrow. Now remember, the Psalms are a language of response. We talked about back in the introduction. They're inspired by God in His Word as a response to God in praise, and then also a response to the hard, sometimes circumstances of life in a lament. So the lament Psalms give us a guide for how to respond to suffering in faith. And okay, so if you have your Psalm 42 and 43 in front of you, let's just start at the very top where it says, "To the choir master, a maskil of the sons of Korah." Who were the sons of Korah? Well, if you remember back in the book of Numbers, that Korah was a Levite who rebelled against Moses and Aaron, and his punishment was actually that the earth swallowed him up. So his descendants, however, are singers in the worship of God and possibly the authors of Psalms. It's hard to tell from this if this psalm was actually written by the sons of Korah or if this was an anonymous psalm for the sons of Korah to read. Either way, what we find here, and this is not the main point of the psalm, but just an aside, that no matter what is in your ancestry or your family, no matter how many Korahs, you might say, you have in your family tree of people who have rebelled against God and experienced the consequences of that, you, like the sons of Korah, can still make the choice to worship God. You are not determined by your family tree, where you're from, your extended family, your immediate family. The sons of Korah did not forever have a bad name under judgment because of the wrong choices that Korah made. Rather, they became worshipers and singers in the house of God. And this psalm is either written to or for, by or for them. So Psalms 42 and 43 are two psalms, but the reason we're doing them both this week is that scholars believe they originally were one psalm in three parts. Section 1 is 42, 1 through 5. Section 2, verses 6 through 11. And then section 3 would be Psalm 43. And you can see each section of the psalm ends with the same refrain or chorus, which we will talk about in a moment. But for now, let's just go ahead and jump in with verse 1 of section 1. "As the deer pants for flowing streams or streams of water, so pants my soul for you, O God." And the picture that we get here is not of a deer who is quenching its thirst in the water, but rather a deer who is thirsty, who is panting, who is longing for the water, so thirsty right in front of it, but it can't go to the water. Perhaps there's a risk, maybe there's a hunter out there and it sees the water and it's panting for it, but it can't go, is that sense that we get from this verse. So remember with our day 4, the adoration, who are you, Lord? You are the God who satisfies me. My soul pants for you. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God, as a deer is longing for water. And this reminded me of Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 13. "For my people have committed 2 evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters." So Jesus is our fountain of water, God, the only one who can satisfy our souls. But how often do we forsake him and instead, as this verse says, hew out cisterns for ourselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water? So in other words, things in our lives, maybe even good things that we turn into idols, marriage, family, home, work, comfort, food, even a ministry, can be a broken cistern where the water just flows through and we hold it up thinking that it will satisfy us and it will be enough, but it is empty. It's broken. All the water has poured out. Only Jesus is the fountain of living water that can satisfy our soul. So the psalmist continues in verse 3. My tears have been my food day and night. And remember, the Psalms of Lament are given to us as a guide. And I don't know about you, but my response to suffering or to hurt in my own life is often to minimize or deny it, or just try to distract myself by watching a television show or reading a book or thinking about something else. And it's just kind of, maybe in our culture, like, I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. Yeah, we're all fine. So kind of a stiff upper lip, pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps kind of thing, where we all just kind of act like we're fine, even when we're not fine. And this Psalm of Lament gives us a very different example, where in verse 3, he's essentially saying, I've been crying day and night. I don't know about you, but often when I dissolve into tears, I then kind of turn to self-condemnation, like, I'm not handling this very well. I shouldn't have gotten emotional. But we see here that this is actually an example of how to respond to suffering, that our tears day and night then turn to verse 4, as I pour out my soul. And this is a picture of turning in our tears to the Lord and our prayer, pouring out our soul to him, not pretending that we're fine and distracting ourselves from our grief, but instead turning to the Lord and pouring out our soul to him. Verse 3, the end of it, while they say to me all the day long, where is your God? That gives us a hint into the circumstances of the psalmist, that there are our enemies, or those who are in opposition to him. And in asking, where is your God? What they really mean is, your God doesn't exist. He's not going to save you. It's foolish to believe in him. And how many of you have thought that or heard others expressing that this year? Where is God in a pandemic? Where is God in the injustice and the racism and the protests and the rioting that are going on in our country now? Where is God? We can ask that ourselves to God. God, where are you? And then others in opposition to our faith can ask that to us. Where is your God? If he existed, surely he'd be doing something, right? So we can see the circumstances of the psalmist, others in opposition to him. We also see, as we go on in verse 4, more clues to the circumstances that he's in. He talks about how he remembers, see in verse 4, these things I remember. He remembers going to the sanctuary, the house of God, in a procession with glad shouts, with songs of praise, a multitude, a festival. He's remembering this, but he is currently separated from it. And we don't know how or why was the psalmist not able to get to the sanctuary right now. Was this written by David in the wilderness? Perhaps, but we don't know. Was this written by someone who was banished for some reason or in exile? We really don't know. But here's what we do know. This is from Alan P. Ross. The psalmist is apparently separated from the formal place of worship in Jerusalem by some distance, finding himself in the mountainous regions of the sources of the Jordan. So here he is remembering back to when there was a multitude and a festival, and when he would go with the throng. But now he is separate from that. So, does that ring any bells with our circumstances right now in 2020? Like, what are you remembering that you now are separate from? I'm remembering things like big church service inside, or conferences where we would all be singing together, where there might be tables of food and people are laughing and talking and together, and nobody is wearing masks and no one is afraid of getting sick. Those are things that I remember and that I long for again. And so Psalms 42 and 43 were written in circumstances very similar to what we might be feeling right now. I remember being in a multitude, a festival, a throng, glad shouts, songs of praise. I remember that, and I miss that. So the psalmist is writing from circumstances of separation and of loss that are very similar to what we are facing right now. Let's go to verse 5, which is the refrain or the chorus. Remember, this is at the end of each of the sections. So 3 times the psalmist comes back to this idea. Why are you cast down, O my soul, and why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise him, my salvation and my God. So this refrain has a negative line and a positive line. The negative part is a correction in the form of a question. Why are you cast down? Why are you downcast, O my soul? This is an example of self-talk, right? The psalmist is talking to himself. Why are you in turmoil, disturbed, restless, like the raging of the sea, tossed to and fro? That's the negative part. The positive part, again, this is an example of positive self-talk, speaking to ourselves. He says, hope in God. Hope is an instruction to wait patiently, but expectantly for God to work. It is not merely hope against hope, but a solid anticipation of the living God. The hope is anticipation because the power to deliver was not in himself or in others, but in the living God alone. And when the psalmist says, for I shall again praise him, he's believing that God will intervene. God will act. God will answer my prayers, and then I will praise him for that. My salvation and my God. Here in the first version of the chorus, it can be translated the salvation of his face. In other words, salvation coming from the face of God. And then in the second and the third reiterations of the refrain, it's salvation of my face, or some translations are my countenance. In other words, salvation coming from God for my whole person. But it means essentially the same thing. Our salvation comes from God, our Savior. So let's go ahead into section 2, verse 6. My soul is cast down within me. Remember again the honesty of this as a lament. He's admitting how he feels. His soul is depressed and cast down. Therefore, I remember you. So he's been remembering being with the multitude, in a throng, in a festival, but now he's purposing, therefore I remember you. And this reminded me of the Lauren Daigle song, I remember, I won't sing it for you, don't worry. I remember you have always been faithful to me. What are we remembering right now in the year 2020? The things we miss, the things we hope will happen again soon, but also, therefore, God, I purpose to remember you. I remember your character. I remember how you have always acted in my life. And the end of verse 6 just gives us a tiny bit of trivia as far as where the psalmist might be. This is what Alan P. Ross wrote. Mount Hermon, and I found a picture of it there for you, is in the far north of Israel on the border with Syria. Calling this the land of Jordan must then be a reference to the Jordan River, the headwaters of which spring up from under the mountains. Mount Mizar, I think is how that's said, is not known, but probably was a smaller peak in the area. So the area is identified for us rather clearly. It was known in the New Testament as Caesarea Philippi. And also there are waterfalls in this area, in the deeper canyons where the water rushes down from the mountains to form the Jordan. So when the psalmist says in verse 7, deep calls to deep at the roar of your waterfalls, he may be actually seeing a waterfall while he's thinking this or is writing this. Now back in verse 1, when it was as the deer pants for water, The water was a symbol of life and of God satisfying us. Here in verse 7, the water is a symbol of danger, of threat, of it's symbolic of his sorrow is overwhelming him and of drowning him. But verse 8, we again see, remember this psalm of lament as a guide for us to how to respond to suffering. The psalmist is just speaking truth to himself. By day, the Lord commands his steadfast love. And the Hebrew word for steadfast love, which I can't pronounce right, but it's something like hesed, and it's used over and over in the Bible and often is translated as steadfast love. But it's the idea of God's love, but it's also the idea of God's steadfastness, his loyalty, his forever love, a love that we can really depend on, a love that here in this verse, he commands to us. It says in Psalm 23, his hesed will follow us all the days of our life. And so the psalmist says, at night his song is with me, a prayer to the God of my life. God gave him reason to sing in the darkest hour. The psalmist became a night singer, no doubt singing his prayer to strengthen his faith and lift his spirits. And the choice to sing, whether that's actually in the nighttime for you, or just you might say in the dark night of the soul, in the hard times, the choice to sing God's truth to yourself, to turn on worship music or hymns, to listen, to sing along, can be a choice to strengthen your faith and uphold your spirits in the middle of a hard time. Verse 9, we really see the tension of the psalmist. I say to God, my rock, so my refuge, my hiding place. Remember we talked a week ago, he hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock. That's who God as our rock is. But then he says, why have you forgotten me? Wait, so he just says, God is my rock, my refuge, my hiding place. Why have you forgotten me? Now we know from Isaiah 49:15 to 16, these beautiful verses, can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget. In other words, there can be terrible circumstances when a mother who was abusive or just sick or incapable or something might forget her child who she is nursing. But typically a mother with a nursing baby is a picture of faithfulness and remembering and care. If you have ever had a baby that you have nursed, you know that you don't forget them. You remember them, right? And this is a picture of Jesus. Yet I will not forget you. Behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. So we know God will never forget us. So what's this question about in verse 9? What it's saying is God does not forget his people, but it's possible during hard times for his people to feel forgotten by him. And when we feel forgotten by God, even though we know that God has not forgotten us, but when we feel forgotten, then it's a time for a lament psalm, to turn to the Lord in that way, with tears day and night, pouring out our soul. Verse 10, when it says, as with a deadly wound in my bones, I mean, you could paraphrase that as basically, I feel like I'm dying. So remember, what the psalmist is doing here is he's not denying his pain or minimizing it or, I'm fine. He's turning to the Lord and saying, God, I feel like I'm dying. And I'll be honest with you, okay, just because I'm doing this teaching every week doesn't mean that I have my life all together and that I'm fine, because I'm often not. And I've had a really rough week. I have felt depressed this week. Something that I was relying on happening this upcoming year is now, like so many other things in my life, up in the air because of the pandemic. And that was just really hard for me this week. It just kind of felt like the final straw. And I'm gonna get emotional. So this psalm was like an example to me, not to minimize or deny how I'm feeling, that it's okay to turn to the Lord and be like, God, I feel like I'm dying right now. I feel like you've forgotten me, even though I know that you haven't. I'm going to hope in you. I'm going to wait expectantly for you to act. So let's go ahead to the third section of the psalm, or Psalm 43. This is the final part of the lament, is the petition part. So it's where he turns his prayer to God, and there are two major petitions he asks God for. The first is in verse 1, where, let me see in my notes, he says, "Vindicate me, O God, defend my cause." In other words, plead for me in court. Take up my cause, decide a controversy, make a right judgment for me, rescue me from the deceitful and the unjust man. And when there is injustice in our nation that we see, whether it's racial injustice or any kind of injustice that we are lamenting, this is a verse that we can pray. God, defend the cause of your people. Rescue your people from those who are deceitful and unjust. And then in verse 2 here is very similar to verse 9 of the previous psalm. They both repeat the phrase, "Why do I go about mourning? Because of the oppression of the enemy." And we see the tension here too when he says, "For you are the God in whom I take refuge. You are my rock, you're my hiding place. I take refuge in you. Why have you rejected me?" And remember, God has not rejected us. Psalm 94:14 says, "For the Lord will not forsake his people. He will not abandon his heritage." God does not reject us, but sometimes we feel like he has. Then the second major request of this petition we see in verse 3, where he's saying, "Send out your light and your truth." So he's asking God to guide him back to the sanctuary. And he's so sure that God will answer him that in verse 4, he's making plans. "Then I will go to the altar of God, to God my exceeding joy." Now, this can be interpreted in two ways. One way is that the psalmist is confident that his circumstances of separation will end and that he will go back to this sanctuary of God, experiencing God as his exceeding joy, that God will send out his light and truth to guide the psalmist back from his banishment or exile, wherever he is, back to the sanctuary. Another way of interpreting it is, even if God doesn't answer the psalmist's prayer in a physical way, so even if the psalmist remains in separation, he will still find God to be his exceeding joy, and he will be able to worship him wherever he is. So back to our day 4, the adoration theme. Who are you, God? You are my exceeding joy. You are my delight. So the theme of these two psalms, Alan P. Ross wrote, "Devout believers who find themselves separated from the sanctuary and overwhelmed by enemies of the faith long to be in the sanctuary, praising God for his saving acts." So just a final question to think about as we think about applying the psalm. What can I do when circumstances separate me and enemies oppress me? One is pour out my soul honestly to God. Don't minimize or deny how I'm feeling. Don't turn away from God in despair, but turn toward God in faith. And just like a pitcher pours out water, pouring out my soul honestly to God. He's our Father. He wants to know how we are feeling. Pouring out our soul to him. Believe, speak truth to myself. Believe God is my exceeding joy no matter what happens. And he commands his hesed, remember, his steadfast love that will follow me all the days of my whole life. Sing through the night. Again, just a practical way to strengthen our faith in God by singing to him. And then hope. In other words, wait expectantly for God to act. Are you waiting expectantly right now in this month of June for God to act in your life? Are your eyes open? Are you ready and waiting to see how is God going to act? How is he going to rescue you? Maybe not in the way you had envisioned, but we know that God will act on our behalf and work out what is good for us. He comes through for his people who hope in him. Let's close in prayer. Lord, I just thank you for this psalm as a lament, as a guide for us, Lord, to know how to respond to you when life is really hard, to know how to respond to you when we are separated from things that we remember and long for. But Lord, may we say with the psalmist, I remember you. And may we remember you and your steadfast love and your exceeding joy. Strengthen our faith, Lord, right now in this season of separation, of uncertainty. Strengthen our faith and our hope and our joy in you, I pray. Amen.